Welcome at the panel discussion on the decentralizing AI fairness decisions. My name is Juriaan Paris from the Netherlands NGO Algorithm Audit, a European knowledge platform for AI bias testing and normative AI standards. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss the topic. Can please go to slide back. This is already a spoiler at the technical crew in the back. Sorry? Yeah, the opening slide, please, with the panelists. Would it be possible? Because I'm happy to here have as well the panelists joining our discussion on this decentralizing fairness decisions. First, I'm happy to introduce Laurens Nouts. Laurens Nouts is a postdoctoral researcher at the AI, Media and Democracy Lab and Institute for Information Law of the University of Amsterdam, and is an affiliated senior researcher at KU Leuven, Center for IT and IP Law. Next to Laurens, happy to introduce Karolina Iwanska. Karolina is Digital Civic Space Advisor at the European Center for Not-for-Profit Law, an NGO working to protect and promote civic freedoms. And then to the right, Francine Deschesne, on French, maybe the Dutch as well, pronunciation, sorry for that. And she's an associate professor of ethics and digital technologies at the Center for Law and Digital Technologies, E-Law of Leiden Law School. Happy to join you, that you are joining us panelists. First, we will start with a short introduction of the case study we will discuss from the Netherlands. It's a 5 to 10 minute intro to get our hands dirty on algorithmic practice, and then we will zoom out to the wider consequences of specific topics of this case study. That's where the slide is about, so I hope it's now, emerging. We will dive into the problem or ethical issues around risk profiling, and there are many examples of the Netherlands, many case studies and scandals as well from Dutch soil. And at a high level, we want to discuss 4 concepts which are relevant for thinking about risk profiling and how it can be potentially be done in a responsible manner. First, we want to move from the left to the right. We have an entire population at full population scale, for instance, for a certain social welfare benefit scheme or an e-commerce platform, clients using after-pay services, for instance. And we want to go to the right to see whether a certain select group performs a certain action. We do this sampling because we cannot control all citizens or customers at the same time. And one way of doing sampling, it's in the core quite statistical concept, is random sampling. We just roll the dice and select citizens or clients to be scrutinized or subjected to a certain check. So that's at the right-hand side, but there are many disadvantages according to random sampling, and it has pros as well. A pro is that it's totally fair. A con is that there's an extreme high false discovery rate for people who do not fraud or misuse certain services. Another option then becomes signal sampling. There's a signal within an organization, at the municipality for instance, or at an organization, say, this is suspicious behavior. That suspicious behavior signal is validated. People are selected for sampling. Another one is profiling in the classical sense, like human analysts or subject matter experts select criteria with sometimes a beer and pizza night. We heard from stories in the Netherlands at the municipal level, to select certain criteria. Young men under 25 in a certain district of the city, trait criteria, risk profile, that's used to select and sample citizens, for instance. For this problem of variable selection, rather than conducting beer and pizza nights, is algorithmic sampling. We have machine learning methods exploiting higher dimensional forms of correlations, invisible for the human eye. So it has this promise of doing variable selection, selecting the top 10 variables with highest predictive value. So we just want to give this overview that we say, okay, the top 3 are risk-based. This belongs to risk profiling, how to weigh all these different methods by moving from the left to the right in a general setting, not only in public sector organizations, but as well in private sector, because risk profiling today it's everywhere. We can't escape from it, you can say, but we will touch on that well during the panel discussion. Now, certain questions emerge. How should this profiling method be weighed? Depending on the context it's applied, is it more service-oriented, the sampling procedure, or is it more antagonistic, more fraud detection like, and how does that application of profiling should be weighed in thinking about ethical issues? A second question is regarding the criteria, which criteria should be excluded from profiling, either machine learning based, algorithmic based, or human beer and pizza based, on forehand to prevent proxy discrimination, for instance. There's no silver bullet to prevent indirect discrimination. A third question is, there are new forms of differentiation that are not directly linked to protected grounds under EU non-discrimination law, but can as well result in unethically undesired bias. So that's a different branch rather than indirect discrimination, where it has a strong legal connotation, the ethical undesirable way of differentiation. Then the fourth question is, if you decide to do a certain type of profiling, how should algorithmic profiling be weighed against the alternative, which is the human way of selecting criteria? So what's the human versus machine bias interaction there? These questions we submitted to a panel for a certain use case to shed light in these dynamics and these ethical concerns. So that's what we did. We spoke with a lot of citizens, investigative journalists who have been looking into this, the municipality of Rotterdam, who applied an algorithm and pioneered with machine learning-based variable selection, municipal institutions like the Court of Auditors, legal experts. And we put this all together in a problem statement. It's a quite heavy document with 60 pages or so. And we asked a commission of a group of experts and as well people subjected to the algorithm who provided input and interacted with the commission to shed light in the ethical issues we just raised. And Francine is one of those people who is here today. We are very happy to share some results about how this deliberative way of putting people together in a room is experienced and what lessons can be learned from it and can be shared within the European and international community of AI auditing in a more holistic and participatory way. First of all, we had this problem statement. The Commission provided written input to share some initial viewpoints. We then did a Commission gathering together in a room on a hot evening 1 year ago, or 9 months ago, just touching upon the specific questions we just raised. The outcome we want to dive into today is a list of variables the Commission concluded to be ineligible and eligible for profiling. They should be excluded on forehand or could be considered for profiling on forehand. And this is one output. It is like embedded in a wider advice that the context and application of profiling should be weighed very carefully. Is it more antagonistic or is it more cooperative? Is it more fraud detection-like or service-oriented? That is very important where it's more antagonistic, there are more variables to the red side. If it's more service-oriented, the Commission, for instance, could be more lenient to putting certain variables in green rather than in red. This kind of example of putting variables and exclude them for profiling on forehand, we call that algoprudence. It's a kind of jurisprudence for algorithms at a very practical level, at the algorithmic practice level. And we provide a rationale on the right bottom side in a legenda why certain variables are excluded or included. And especially this rationale why are certain variables included or excluded is, we think, a very valuable starting point to have an in-depth, concrete conversation about responsible AI and all madness around it. So algorithms and jurisprudence, we try to combine it and say that's algoprudence. It has its own word. It is different than jurisprudence. It's non-legally binding, it's decentralized, and that's exactly the topic of today. Having that said, and having this short introduction, I wanted to give the word to Francine to ask, how did you consider and experience this endeavor of participating in a deliberative way of coming to this type of algoprudence and this list of red and green variables?
Thank you very much. I'm actually very happy that I get an opportunity to speak about that experience, which was really informative for me. I come from academia, so and also my background is in mathematics, computer science, and philosophy, all the more abstract disciplines that are related to these questions. And so what this experience did for me is it gave me an experience in engaging. So how these very abstract principles that we tend to formulate when we speak about responsible AI, trustworthy AI, fairness in the context of AI, how this embeds in practice. And so the experience of having a deliberation in the context of a very concrete case in a specific municipality for a specific task of the government was really productive, I think. So there were different representatives of stakeholders present, and we all felt very open to share perspectives. Maybe it's also good to say that by the time we had this deliberation, the municipality had already decided to stop using the system that we were discussing. So we were really there for lessons learned and not for, also not, I felt, under a pressure to legitimize or to delegitimize the system. We were there for lessons learned. And I thought to do that in this very concrete context with these different perspectives, including an alderman from a municipality with a responsibility for these matters. Well, Dutch municipalities have a large responsibility for being responsible in spending tax money on social support, and for also that perspective to be on the table in this conversation was really mind-opening. What I took away from this experience is that on the one hand, there is not a standard fix for the issues that we discuss in this debate. And I think it's really important to learn from concrete cases in concrete context to navigate what uses of these systems we consider to be acceptable and for which purposes, and also to reflect on the pushes outside of the system that are at risk. So what's often overlooked in these discussions, I think, is that given that there is a technology, we forget to question what the problem, and even framing something as a problem is already stepping into the frame. But what is the duty of the institution using these technologies towards society, and does the system map well on the duty, or does it prioritize one aspect over another? And I think one of the most I was really happy that in that conversation that we had, I think it was an afternoon of 3 hours or so, we spent a lot of time talking about this dual responsibility of municipalities for, spending tax money appropriately / finding out abusers of the system versus the service-oriented, as you frame it, I would say, like duty of care part of a government. And we actually found that the outcomes of the system gave great pointers for who are the people who need help. If you use such systems, it gives a very clear picture of some societal problems that a government also has responsibility for. However, the way the system is used very easily goes into the antagonistic use of finding fraudsters, and even using those words pushes the use of that system in a way that's not necessarily the only or the best use that the system can have. We also talked about, can we have this conversation with representatives of academia, of municipalities, but not having people directly affected on the table? I think we came to the conclusion, I was very happy that the ombudsperson of the Rotterdam was there. For me, they were the representative of the people affected, and I also felt that if we would have gone out and asked, like, you were somebody who was singled out as a high-risk fraudster, now come to our kind of academic or highly abstract to inform us, because we need you to tell us what it's like. That's also putting a lot of emotional labor and like labor onto somebody who. So I felt that having the ombudsperson there was actually a very good middle ground, and I was also very happy that also that kind of questions came to the table, like what is the positionality of everyone here, and do we have the full picture? So there were interesting observations that were made. When using the system, what was the framing of the problem, or even framing it as a problem? We discussed a lot about that and about the obligations and the responsibilities that a government has. And I found that actually these systems could be useful, maybe even more for let's say, the duty of care side of the government, of the local government, and that was, I think, a learning outcome for me. A few very concrete things. It was shocking to me that there were just blatantly illegal parameters that were in the data set, and like how did nobody flag this? There was another assistant professor from a law school who is more in law, but we were like, wait, what? Isn't this just like prohibited? So we did agree, as the slide showed, we did agree that some parameters are really, really way too prone to be proxies for those sensitive characteristics. The overall conclusion was these systems can be useful for things, but you have to be really careful for which applications, and never just rely on one way of doing the selection. There was a huge consensus on that. Always combine also the human oversight, and I saw, Jurian, on your slide, you drew a box that left out the randomization. I am, through the work of Bernard Harcourt, against prediction, very much a fan of involving randomization in these systems as a way of validating and updating, and as a mechanism of as a way out of malicious feedback loops that you may run into. So these were some concrete outcomes that I think are very useful lessons learned from a very concrete case. But they can be transferred to other cases, and they can provide a lens, and as Jurian also said, some topics for critical discussion of the use of these systems.
Thanks, Francine. And maybe pointing a question towards Laurens and then Carolina, is this decentralizing push, both at the international and national level, to think about these concrete ethical issues. How should it be solved from an institutional perspective to provide certain legal protection for fundamental rights, for instance, like all different type privacy, equal treatment, etc. That both municipalities have to decide on this. There are 342 of them in the Netherlands only. They all have to deal with the same national law and think about the same profiling dynamics and all different things related to it. And at the same time, in the AI context, that you have this push for fundamental rights impact assessments at the national level, self-assessment for conformity under the AI Act. Can we trust all different decentralized actors with making these decisions, or should institutions step up further? How do you see that from your academic expertise?
Right. Yeah. Do you want to? Well, I mean, I would first want to actually take a step back. First of all, I really appreciate the comments Francine gave, and I was happy to hear her experience and also some of the findings and also experiences that she had while participating in this expert panel, especially the comment about trying to reflect upon one's own positionality when entering a room. And I think perhaps a first question that we should ask ourselves is, why do we have these discussions about trying to rethink algorithmic governing strategies in the first place? And I think I try to enter this space from a more critical and situated perspective, where I look at the AI or anatomy of AI or the AI value chain, which is characterized by great social inequality from its ideation phase, like when we entertain the idea to impose intrusive border tech. This might already betray something about how we view the dignity of non-EU citizens and people on the move. From the creation of AI, where we use legacy data sets now disbanded, such as Leon 5B, of whom it was known that it was rife with sexist and racist content, to the implementation of technologies, where you see that all these social inequalities present in data, but also latently present in the norms and values that we communicate with, are replicated in a system as the one that you discussed. And of course, when we look at this social inequality, even though these systems might be imposed indiscriminately, such as mass surveillance technologies by law enforcement, we nonetheless witness that the majority or the disproportionate suffering is experienced by vulnerable and marginalized communities, such as people on the move, sex workers, LGBTQI+ community, etc. And I think that what is important to realize is that the social inequality is intrinsically linked to the political inequality that people experience, where the decisional authority, when it comes to the should we use AI in the first place, to its design, which parameters to decide upon, to the actual implementation and assessment a priori or exposed through fundamental rights impact assessment, is often afforded to a select few actors, and that the decisional autonomy and authority of vulnerable, marginalized communities often is not existent. And you see this in private companies, where even people within companies such as Google, who have done good work, are dismissed as soon as they come up with an idea as to the wrongs of large language models, to the public sector, as is the case as was the case in the Netherlands with the Siri scandal, as well as the Toeslagen affair, to even, and not only look at individual institutions or actors, but also look at a shared responsibility of us as citizens in a sort of gig economy, where our desire to have food and deliveries happen for us in a more fast and quick pace co-determines the conditions under which data laborers, data workers work. So if we look at how to democratize AI, I think, okay, how can we do so in a manner that increases the voice and choice of those often unheard, knowing that systems determine their living conditions, whether it is their working environment or simply the way they exercise a job, or are able to land a job and then convert the money that they might have into pursuing recreational activities. And then we can start to discuss how can we actually operationalize this, and how can we do so, and how can we increase this in a way that is actually beneficial. Because it's one thing to invite people into a room and ask, how do you feel about the design of a certain system, then actually listen to people, and actually listen to people in a way that they are heard in a meaningful way. And where companies not only use people to, as a sort of, we've done our job, we've listened to them, or public institutions, but actually convert those lived experiences into a sort of reflective exercise where one tries to get really acquainted with how it is to experience as a given system, or how to use a given system, and to translate that in hopefully a more social and politically desirable way of assessing the impact of these systems to begin with.
What's your take on view on this from a digital civic space, Carolina?
Thank you so much, and thank you so much also for sharing your experience with the Rotterdam case. As a resident of Rotterdam, this feels very personal almost. I will build on what Lauren said because I think we are trying to hammer a similar point, I feel like. So traditionally, decisions about fairness, about fundamental rights, about discrimination, I think they reside very much, they give the power to make those decisions to the developer of the system or to the deployer of the system. And so when we talk about decentralization, we're talking about maybe shifting power dynamics a little bit from the hands of those that develop those systems into those who might be affected by those systems. Another aspect is that very often also, even Julian, from your presentation, I think we kind of need to take almost like a step back because we focused immediately on the parameters, the technical parameters of the system, what is considered discrimination within the system, which parameters, which input data can, correlate with sensitive characteristics, for instance. And this, I think, points to the broader issue of focusing a lot when we make decisions about fairness in AI on technical parameters of algorithms in a way that is kind of focusing on these kind of technocentric solutions without asking the broader questions that you, Lawrence, hinted at of, why is this system considered to be used in the first place? What is the purpose of that system? So, in my opinion, the effective decentralized approach of assessing AI systems holds a lot of promise of shifting that power, but provided that we actually embed it from the very, very beginning of considering a certain system, so that people come in not after the system has been withdrawn or during the design phase, but even to answer the question, okay, into the decision-making process of the very decision of actually deciding to use an algorithm and for what purpose. That is, much more political in a sense because, for instance, to take the case of the Rotterdam algorithm. Why has it been decided that it will be used for, finding people for re-examination? That was precisely what you said, that actually you discovered that it could be useful to actually find people who might need more, social benefits, who might need more support, rather than identifying those who are the so-called abusers. I really don't like this framing in general. But, how is fraud even defined? And if there is fraud in the welfare system, why do people, cheat? What are the sociological considerations and conditions for people to feel like, they are not comfortable enough financially, economically in the society that they feel that the need to cheat, if that really happens. So I think the purely technical approaches, they cannot answer those questions. So even the mere decision of deploying an algorithm is, I think, a very important part of decentralizing fairness in AI. Another point, for instance, the aspect of structural inequalities is one issue, but then also within the algorithm itself, how is individual justice guaranteed, for instance? So I saw on the slide that the one criterion that was deemed acceptable was a no-show at the municipality appointment. But, for instance, to what extent is it taken into account? What was the reason for this no-show? Is it just like someone completely disregarded, doesn't care? Or is the reason that, they had childcare obligations, or maybe they couldn't leave work, So I feel like to what extent are those individual considerations taken into account? Also another case from the Netherlands, not linked to welfare, but linked to Uber, surveillance of Uber drivers. That was precisely why the Uber algorithm that is rating drivers' trustworthiness was challenged, because it wasn't taking into account their individual circumstances that made them, for instance, unavailable for taking certain jobs, because they were punished for rejecting kind of requests for rights. And that was precisely the reason why I now can't remember if it was the DPA or the court that challenged this algorithm based on the fact that it wasn't taking into account individual circumstances. So to sum up also, if we are talking about true, a meaningful decentralization, I think that has to be embedded from the very, very beginning to even decide, what societal problem do we want to fix with this algorithm? Is this the right method of addressing this problem? Do we have the same view of the problem? And also not by proxies, like proxy representatives, but actually by engaging with people who are going to be affected by this algorithm. And I do understand this is not easy. This as you mentioned, very often, for instance, it has to be considered how to also compensate people for their time and for their lived experience. And this is expertise. We also have very broad, very narrow understanding of expertise, inviting only lawyers and technologists to the table, but maybe sometimes sociologists, like very rarely. But I feel like we also need to broaden the term of expertise if we really want to make decentralization meaningful. And one last point I wanted to make is also the buy-in and the actual impact of decentralization. So that links to my first point. So if we engage people in decentralizing decisions about even the parameters of algorithms, do they actually have impact on how those systems are going to be used, or have the decisions been already made, and it's really just maybe some cosmetic fixes of certain things that really create the risk of missing the forest for the trees if the actual issue with the algorithm lays with its very optimization goals, the mere fact of for what purpose the algorithm is used, specifically considering the political context in the Netherlands, but also outside, of austerity, of the kind of this political push to limit spending on welfare. So how does so that informs very much the decision of using taxpayer money to develop algorithmic systems that are later withdrawn. I wonder how much money was spent on that instead of kind of shifting that funds to actually helping people who are in need. So these are also all very political decisions that I think we just broadly as society should not discuss in closed doors between technologists and some civil servants who have gotten already kind of decisions from higher up levels that we are doing this algorithm, and so now you have to figure out how to make it fair. But rather fairness starts at the very, very beginning. And this is of course a huge challenge. This kind of touches on broader kind of dynamics in our society, but I think it would not be a fair conversation to have without kind of taking a step back and thinking of maybe how we can rethink how public procurement works, how decisions about deploying algorithms for certain purposes are being made. Thank you.
Thanks. And so maybe just to summarize, we see equilibriums of powers, power dynamics are shifting. We have a certain way of thinking about justice and fairness in society and how to make decisions about it by political arenas, by courts, by supervisory authorities. There has been a political majority for certain laws putting obligations on municipalities in the Netherlands for a long time already. So given a certain political choice already, how to then reconcile yourself with algorithmic practice. Not only algorithmic, but in the core criteria selection of profiling is a very analog, non-AI, non-machine learning, basic, fundamental question, which needs to be made in certain circumstances. How do you weigh the interaction of supervisory authorities there? Francine, given your experience as well from the Netherlands context, like you have a Center for Human Rights, you have the Dutch Data Protection Authority, the Consumer for Market Protection, there are 23 of them. Courts have their delay, politicians have their short-sighted views. Who is here the wise institutional angel to protect the fundamental rights, or should we and all do it in a decentralized manner?
Okay, so that's a concrete question. I had a few things I realized I forgot to mention in my takeaways, but on that last point, long time ago in the late 90s, I also worked for an IT management company that was earning good money from the government. Your remark about why do we not question, or why is there no oversight in the amount of money that we put into building systems that are then abolished or that are then found not to be operational. I read a very disheartening interview a couple of years ago about the person who was appointed by the government to make an inventory of how come that we spend so much money on these systems, and then they generally are at least 3, 4, 5 times as expensive, and all these public resources go into them, and then they turn out to be useless. That person was fired, and she had actually very, very good advice. At least judging on the interview, she was helping the Dutch society not spend resources that then need to be reclaimed in terms of fraud detection myths or mechanisms, just by like asking the question, are these systems functional and do they deserve our public money? But so that's a form of oversight connecting to your question that I think we also need, and is not there, or the sensible outcomes of that oversight is disregarded. There's also a lack of resources that goes into well, parties like the Data Protection Authority. If you compare it to the amount of money that goes into developing systems, it's also a disbalance. So what is the role? Well, they have a nice role on paper, but it's very hard for them to be effective, I think. And I'm not just saying that, okay, so there should be more money, but there should be, I think, more acknowledgement of, and this is referring to the work of Raya Paschier, who conceptualizes the effect of AI on the public sphere as it creates. So we have the trias politica, which is a kind of it's an ideal, and there was a balance between executive power and the lawmaking power and the enforcement. And now we have this technology that kind of blows up the executive part, but we are missing the mechanism of blowing up the other two. So the responsiveness of the lawmaking powers, it's not held by AI. And now, please don't push my button by saying, oh, we can let ChatGPT write our laws, because then I will blow up. But because it is about representation and like actually protecting the people who needs protection in this disturbed power triangle. There was a couple of things that I wanted to say still about my experiences or my takeaways of this process. It was actually very enlightening to me. I think it was something that you mentioned, like, why do we treat people as cheaters when they really try, but they can't? For me, what came out of the parameters that were in that system was a lot of proxies, actually, for where the system was way too complex, and all the complexity is pushed on the people subject to the system. So for me, it was really informative, and we talked also for quite a while about, should parameters actually relate to the question that we asked the system? And so why did a parameter like a no-show for appointments, why did it become flagged as acceptable? Because in any case, it's part of the question that you're asking. Like, is somebody taking the other end of the social security, social benefit? Yeah, you get support, but in exchange for the support, you also, well, not in exchange, but for the support to be, yeah, to be distributed fairly, there's also a responsibility. And yes, there could be a lot of reasons why there is a no-show. And the system could actually point at, these are the people that have big problem in showing up. It may be because of language barriers. It may be because, I don't know, they might not have a personal phone number, and so they miss a point. So there was a huge unused potential, I would say, in figuring out what are the reasons why people do not show up in that system that you could find by looking at parameters that had actually to do with the whole process. So that's something I wanted to add.
Thanks, and I think this balance of powers, it's really a strong case made that executive branch and Dutch government are huge and lacking control mechanisms by courts, by political arena, by politicians, by supervisory authorities, and that in the core is a political decision given the certain economic paradigm. What role then and responsibility is there for all AI professionals and the diverse teams of privacy professionals, legal experts, etc., that are thinking about these type of code level considerations under a certain context that you have to decide whether to include or exclude a variable, either to apply machine learning or rule-based system? What is your exact explainability criteria? What responsibility is there for those people deciding on these more diffuse, decentralized power moments, you can say? To publish that in the wide open, to give accountability and to share that maybe in this wave of algoprudence, that it can be criticized in the open, that people can learn from it, harmonize from it, participate in the debate, critique it, to do right to the democratic process. Any reactions on that from Laurens or Carolina?
Well, I can try. I think first of all, when it comes to the component of, for example, also picking up what Francine has already said, I think, for example, when it comes to political power, you did see at various stages within the AI negotiation process, for example, that civil society could weigh in on the debate, if you look at the European Parliament draft, which was then substantially weakened in the end due to other political dynamics, where unfortunately, when you then give certain additional power to, for example, large economic conglomerates to enter this space legitimately, it could have used additional protective measures such as publicity or the database, which is now quite less, where you can actually, because what I often think is that when AI is put forward, and your question is more from the assumption, okay, we have decided upon AI as a logical tool, but that the efficacy of AI is often assumed rather than demonstrated. And if you had accountability and publicity measures, that efficacy could have been perhaps then assessed by civil society if given the necessary institutional backing or resources to actually perform that audit task, which, for example, your case also kind of illustrates that you can perform an audit and read out normative implications of a system once it is enrolled. If you then do go on to say, okay, AI is an effective system here, I think we need to also look at the social context in trying to, wherever your decisional control lies, at what part of the decisional chain, let's imagine it's decision looking at the parameters that might be validly used in trying to judge a person. Do not see it in an isolated context, but also look at the entire social embedding within this decision is rooted and likely will have an impact on. So this point that Carolina earlier made, when you say, okay, no-show, and of course you have to, at one point, decide upon criteria for every type of decision. That's something that you need to do. But I think that in general there is little reflection as to what are the implications, or what might indeed have a person not show. And this is the case in fraud algorithms, but might also be the case in enrollment algorithms in education. What makes an ideal applicant? What makes a good student? And if we decide, for example, that grade is something, could it perhaps be linked to a certain class structure within society that will disadvantage minority groups in society? And also then reflect that this parameter not only controls this isolated decision of fraud, education, hiring, but that decision is connected to what Kriel and Hellman referred to as an entire realm of opportunities. And I think this type of reflection where, okay, I decide upon a job, it is also deciding upon the other additional freedoms people derive from having a job. I decide upon education. It's also me giving or legitimizing a certain educational system that was in place and potentially reinforcing in the future, while at the same time, everything that stems from somebody's educational opportunity that they've had. And I think that it would be already a start, that this reflective process is encouraged. I understand that that might also mean sometimes more administrative burdens for the people involved in a chain, but there's also research being done, among others by sociologists like Milagros Micheli, who like look at documentation as a sort of boundary object that can move throughout an AI value chain, where at the end then it gives possibility to look at where was authority of certain persons, what were the normative implications, and so that you have this trail, while at the same time perhaps also give the capacity of workers to kind of more reflect thoroughly on their own autonomy position within a given framework, to then maybe ideally also have more ability to collectively contest a given practice when it is discovered that, for example, discrimination has occurred.
Just to build on the question of what are the implications of an AI system once the decision has been made that it is going to be developed, I think there is a very good process this reflection about the implications of the system should be embedded into the process of essentially fundamental rights impact assessments or algorithmic impact assessments that are conducted throughout the life cycle of the system. And indeed, under the AI Act, also thanks to the work of civil society, this will be mandatory for the type of systems that we're talking about. So specifically welfare allocation or benefit allocation systems or fraud identification systems. And the important thing, though, is that this should not be treated as a compliance exercise, which is, of course, which is a risk when it is in regulation, and you can get fined for not doing that. So very often, we've already seen in the past with data protection impact assessments, with risk assessments under the Digital Services Act, very often they become purely kind of checkbox of compliance. And I think it will be very important that the AI Act doesn't follow this path, and that fundamental rights impact assessments serve as a reflection moment for everyone involved in the development and deployment of the AI system to reflect precisely on those implications that the system will have on fundamental rights, and not only on those fundamental rights that I feel like there is the most discussion in spaces like this or in general between data protection lawyers and computer scientists, which are the rights to data protection and non-discrimination. These are super important rights, of course, but there are many more other rights in the Charter of Fundamental Rights that are not necessarily considered, or where the expertise or the questions that even are to be asked about an algorithm are well developed. So, speaking from a civics freedoms organization, freedoms of assembly, association, expression, like how do systems, even such systems as welfare allocation systems, what are the considerations to take into account? Like how do they impact people's, other rights, also social and economic rights and civic freedoms? And so that's one consideration, I think, for that. Another one that is not very explicit in the AI Act is that part of the fundamental rights impact assessment, that process there should be a possibility that it ends in a conclusion that actually the risks to fundamental rights are so high and, difficult to mitigate that the system should basically not be deployed. So where are the red lines? The AI Act, of course, includes a category of prohibited systems, which, in my opinion, are very, very insufficient. But the fundamental rights impact assessment process itself should lead to the possibility of concluding, okay, actually we cannot deploy that system anymore, so we have to pause that process. And that can only meaningfully be done with meaningful stakeholder engagement. So that brings me back to our discussion about decentralization. And unfortunately, in the AI Act, for those of you who are following the discussions, the requirement to engage affected people and civil society at first was built into the article. However, it was removed from the article at the last stages of the negotiation process under this argument that, oh, it's going to be too burdensome. It is burdensome. I'm not saying that it isn't, but to me, you cannot accurately identify impacts on people's lives without talking to those people who are going to be impacted. Because everybody, you mentioned earlier, our different positionalities, we can have super great imagination, be very, aware of various societal issues, but we will not, kind of predict all impacts as well as someone who's actually going to be subjected to this system and who understands very well their position within society. So to me, this is really crucial. It has been moved to a recital of the AI Act, so it's not completely gone. And definitely, we are going to be advocating as civil society to make it meaningful. And I will shamelessly plug here ECNL's work on specifying the conditions for what makes stakeholder engagement meaningful. We have a framework for meaningful engagement, which we are actually currently piloting with the municipality of Amsterdam, who are considering or already developing a system, an algorithmic system, and they are very serious about kind of stakeholder engagements, almost going to the direction of co-creation. There was a panel yesterday precisely about that with my colleague Vanya Skoric, who talked more about that. But just to flag 3 elements that I think are crucial to make stakeholder engagement meaningful and to contribute to effective decentralization of those decisions. So the first element is shared purpose. So that is, I think, the foundational also element, because that means, okay, what is actually the purpose of this engagement? If I, as a civil society activist, as an affected person, obviously I have, lots of other things to do. Why would I participate in this process in the first place? What is the purpose of this process? Is it to identify potential misuse? Is it to identify, potential implications of that system in a specific context? Is it to find maybe mitigation measures? So what is the purpose, and do we have an equal understanding within everybody involved? What are we really working towards? Is there a specific outcome that we are working towards, or is it just like a stakeholder meeting where everybody goes, there's a picture at the end, and what's the point of that? So that's the first aspect. The second aspect is trustworthy process. So to have clarity about how much time is going to take. Is there going to be remuneration for my time? Is there, to what extent this process is inclusive? So who is actually part of this process, and how were those that are participating in this process selected? So who makes that decision? Is there a possibility, for instance, for civil society organizations to suggest people who should be at the table? Because very often civil society has a very good understanding of the ecosystem, and maybe there should also be an open call separately from that. So that's trustworthy process, and the recognition of what are the barriers and limitations that would make it difficult for people to participate. In terms of their time, in terms of their resources, in terms of also their expertise and the type of expertise. So how to make this process also accessible for people, so that we don't talk about make it accessible for people without a certain type of expertise. This is very, very difficult, of course. Even within between lawyers and computer scientists, it's very difficult to often talk the same language. Let alone people who don't have experience with regulation, with how AI systems are built, with and their experience really relies on how they are on the receiving end of those algorithms, and they understand very well the actual impacts. And so the third one is the visible impact. So something that I also mentioned earlier is, how do you make sure that actually your input, your feedback is going to be taken into account? Very often, and this is my experience also in civil society, you contribute to a process, you share your feedback, you say what are the good things, what are the bad things, and then you never hear back about, was your feedback taken into account? How was your feedback addressed? If some of your recommendations were not taken on board, why was that? And what were the alternative options? So I think these are the 3 conditions to me to make decentralization truly meaningful, together with, as I mentioned earlier, kind of embedding that from the very, very beginning of the process. And of course, this leads to the question of, in a way, this is very subversive, because if indeed that is a very heavy process, right? It's very long, it's very expensive. So to me, that, I think, could lead to the question of kind of a second thought of okay, do we actually want to develop this system? If already from the very beginning, we are hearing voices that, for instance, it's not feasible, or it's not desirable to have this type of system. So I think this is ultimately also a very important decision to make at the beginning, and a possibility to really provide some reflection into the whole process.
Thank you so much to all panelists for contributing to the debate. And now want to open the floor to the audience to raise questions. I see here a hand already, but not a mic yet. I'm wondering whether there's a mic coming over. It's on its way. Here it is. Then we go to the person in.
Hi, thanks for the panel. I agree with many of the things that were said, but I'm a bit concerned that this decentralization approach focuses too much on the process and not so much on the outcomes, and reproduces an ideal process that doesn't really exist. I was thinking, we just finalized the adversarial auditing of a recidivist tool used in Spain. That's a tool that is used to decide whether inmates get permission to leave prison or access to freedom. And the developers are very proud because there's a lot of human intervention. And then when we reverse engineered it, we found it to be random, which means that the combination of objective and subjective factors, because of the human intervention, meant that in the end, the objective factors basically disappeared from the assessment. There was no correlation between risk factors and actual likelihood to access freedom. For me, that's what's concerning. It's I don't care if humans are involved or not. I am concerned that we have objective factors that then disappear. And I think that a system that follows objective factors is better than a system that doesn't, and that is random. So I'm if it's only about the process, what if the process leads to something like that? What do we do about that? And who decides whether objective factors are better than subjective decision-making process by prison authorities? So that's the first thing, how to address issues of what are the outcomes, what are the impacts, what are the decisions being made, who's being left out and who isn't. And then maybe a more provocative note on the issue of stakeholder participation. I travel a lot, I get on planes a lot. I literally put my life and my property in the hands of airlines all the time. I'm not sure I want to be in a panel about airline security. I'm not sure I want to be consulted. I want to make sure that airplanes don't fall off the sky, especially not with me in it. But and there's accountability when a plane falls off the sky. I think that because we don't have that in AI, we're kind of looking for very complex solutions that put a lot of burden on the impacted communities, when maybe we should just be requiring that whenever an AI plane falls off the sky and people are harmed, that there are consequences. I'm just not a fan of stakeholder engagement, I guess.
Thanks. Maybe first quick reaction to the first point about the process and the outcome. I think just the presentation at the very beginning kind of reflects both, that the outcome as well is shared. It's in the wide open. It could be criticized. It could be used, harmonized, debated. People can post reactions to it when it's shared. So I think that's a very core element, that certain group of engineers or a diverse group of people deciding on certain normative questions, if they want to make it transparent, it can be criticized by entire society within a democratic site, which is, I think, key. What's the drawback now from the Netherlands, for instance, that there's a lot of kind of protectionism from the authorities, the public sector organizations, private sector organizations, do not want to disclose what the normative decisions they are taken. So I think there should be more transparency provisions there to make it visible within democratic sites. That's my view on the first point. Maybe other panelists want to react on the stakeholder participation or the plain technical requirements. Yeah.
I can react definitely. I mean, I completely see your point. It's completely true that I wish we had in the AI sphere, the types of laws, and you admitted that also in your intervention, that currently we don't have enough like red lines or kind of safeguards that I feel like would make us all just like very comfortable with, trusting authorities, public authorities, private companies when they use AI. I wish that was the case. This is not the case, but I think also the difference is that, people, we do have a little bit of that in the AI Act in the context of prohibitions, and I think the prohibitions are a direct result of stakeholder engagement that is not just very, very process-led, but the prohibitions are the result of impacted people coming forward and talking about their experiences of how, for instance, facial recognition impacted them, how predictive policing impacted them, how emotion recognition impacted them, civil society also taking on those experiences in developing argumentation for why those type of systems should be prohibited. So I was focusing a lot on stakeholder engagement in the process of the development of AI, but I think we also talk about, actually having people's experiences throughout the whole process also when we decide to ban certain systems. Another I think, difference is that, to use your comparison with planes, and AI, like AI, especially used, to allocate resources, to decide on people's like access to justice, access to benefits, freedom. They are par excellence like very socio-technical systems. They are not about airplane accident is in a different kind of category than harm to people, applying for benefits. It's slightly like, of course, horrible, they're both like super horrible, but I feel like there is a different there are different lessons to be learned from people's input for AI systems that are being used in the societal context. So I think that people's input can genuinely inform. Like for instance, if an airline company organizes a consultation, it's like, oh hey, do you like the belt this way or that way, or should it be like 5 centimeters wider, or like the chairs, should there be like sturdier? Like I have nothing to say, I don't know, should they be sturdier? Like I trust that there is expertise that kind of. The expertise of like what makes plane fall out of the sky less. But in the socio-technical systems, I think people really genuinely have a lot to input, and much more than in the example that you gave. And so in a way, I also definitely agree with you that stakeholder engagement is such a buzzword that I am tired of also talking about this, but in fact, it's not really happening. So as still a buzzword, we can call it something else. We can try to find a more meaningful process, because I agree with you that if we just make this process for the sake of the process, like, it's not the point. The point is really to inform and to have influence on how this, society's influence on what type of systems are being designed, how, for what purpose, rather than being like the. I know it was the expression in English that the fig leaf, or like in Polish we say there's a flower on your coat that like doesn't matter if it's like minus 20 degrees that you have a flower, like it will die anyway. So like it's not really just like a participation. Stakeholder engagement is not like again, it's not a checkbox thing. So, but it is treated currently as checkbox. I've been part of many stakeholder engagement processes, and very often it's it's made not on the terms of people who are being engaged. It's made on the terms of people who are developing the system. It doesn't lead to anything apart from a photo opportunity, as I mentioned. It's really, to me, this is not stakeholder engagement. If we can figure out a way of making it meaningful and making it less kind of burdensome, we try to do that, and we see already, in this case that we are piloting with the municipality of Amsterdam, that this is genuinely valuable input towards a system that is being developed. And
maybe we can move forward to the other
sure.
question as well. Now in the time, no worries. I saw there in the middle a hand, and then we can move to the all at the back. Maybe first the person here in the middle, and then we can go to the...
Thank you. I'm René Mailleux, Open University in Netherlands. I have two short questions, I think. One is about the word decentralization, because I felt a bit of a tension that one thing is decentralization to like a local government. I heard Rotterdam as the prime example, and then Carolina, you mentioned Amsterdam also doing the thing. These are two in the Netherlands, at least quite big cities. But the problems that I think they are addressing are not very specific to either Rotterdam or Amsterdam. They have to do things that actually all city governments in the Netherlands have to do, and will probably face similar problems. So actually, shouldn't it be in that sense less and like more centralized? Actually, maybe at the Vereniging van Nederlandse Gemeenten, or I don't know what the English term is for that. But so there's a question that like, do you, any of the panelists think it should actually be in that sense like decentralized, or could this be a common problem that actually can be discussed or solved at a more central level? Should it be? Or are there reasons not to do that? And the other thing related is the costs, also on two levels of involving more citizens in the type of panels. Like one is the cost to the citizen themselves, but also the cost of organizing it. That could maybe be solved if you centralize more. But also, if a citizen is involved, should they be seen as someone who, for example, gets treated badly by the algorithm and therefore has to have their say? Or should just citizens as citizens be involved? So not a particular citizens that get a bad outcome, but just, and then maybe asking persons in their role as general citizen, does that also make them see the problem differently than when they're pushed into a certain perspective?
Thanks. I saw Francine wanted to
Yeah,
react.
so for me, this experience of being part of investigating a local case in context, and maybe I'm now advertising a little bit for the larger project of algorithm audit with this algoprudence. For me, the purpose of it, or the sense of it, was that from this very local case, lessons can be learned from everybody, and it was very useful for us to have in the Rotterdam case an alderman from Tilburg, also signaling that the core of the problem is a more universal one, but the reality is that the responsibilities for these things are now delegated to decentralized governments, but they all have the same problem, so we can learn from one specific case in one specific context. We can learn generally applicable lessons, and I think your project of algoprudence is trying to open up this, the discourse in any case, and maybe some usable knowledge for the more general use. Then, I feel pressure to be quick with my words, but I think there's a connection between something I wanted to say in response to the previous speaker's second point that kind of relates to your intervention of shouldn't we all as citizens be involved. I think the use of these systems by public authorities is a sign of how these technologies transform. Like, I also refer to the executive branch of government suddenly getting a lot more weight and power. And I think in that debate, other than in a plane where, okay, so if there's turbulence and everybody, 20 people need to be taken to intensive care, we have a quite objective and shared opinion of what went wrong there. But the use of AI in our democratic, very vulnerable, sensitive balance, it's something we should all be given a position to speak about. Unfortunately, the whole technology of AI is giving many parties involved, not too many incentives to go into it, because it's really abstract, it's really difficult, complex to understand impacts, but this is why I would say, yes, this is why in these cases we need stakeholder voices to understand what the impacts are, where in the plane crash case it could be very
Maybe
objective.
last question from the very back.
Yeah.
Yes, I have a very short question. My name is Gerald Hopster from the Dutch DPA. My question is for Carolina. You mentioned the engagement of civil society when a lot of these systems use personal data. In the GDPR, there's Article 35.9 that says if a DPIA is mandatory, it is mandatory to consult your proposed data subjects before you start processing their data. Almost no one is doing this, so almost no one is complying with the GDPR in this point. Isn't this the way in for civil society? Because I get your disappointment with the AI Act, but this can also be a way in because there's a lot of overlap between these two.
Yeah, in short, for sure. I think like whichever kind of due diligence processes exist and like explicitly, require consultation with data subjects, it's very relevant. I think the difference between the DPIAs and the AI Act will be that technically data protection impact assessments do not have to be published. I mean, of course, they can be requested if it's a public authority. I think the power of the fundamental rights impact assessment also under the AI Act will be that it will be published and it will also consider a broader set of implications on a broader set of fundamental rights. But thank you for this suggestion. I think it's really, really relevant. And can I just one sentence before Laurens?
Just one sentence and then Laurens will close.
On the previous question as well, I think this is already a practice in other parts of like public policy, like whenever you're building a new school or deciding on like public transport, this is a common practice to involve citizens broadly. But I think this will obviously lead to situations where there will be conflicts and differences in terms of values, because some people will be like, we want more austerity, we don't want to like give money to fraudsters. Others will be like, we have to be considerate about people's needs. So I think. That will be one challenge. The other challenge is that very often, like the system, we function in the political context when very often the marginalized people are the receiving end of a lot of systems, be it migrants, people on the move, people from lower social economic classes, racialized people, and they're not at the table. So I think they should be prioritized because they are going to be on the receiving end. So recognizing the complexity of consulting citizens, I think priority still should be with those who are most impacted.
Yeah, I also wanted to pick up on René's point, and the first one being, I think diversity is needed and engagement needs to be sought, also given the fact that fundamental rights are not enjoyed equally, meaning that people have differing needs and those differences need to be taken into account. And that's also a fear that I have with fundamental rights in assessments in general, or a risk that could happen, is that we see the affected person or the human right as one monolith, singular thing that means the same for everyone, but human rights are experienced in practice, and those different lived experiences kind of shape how we need to accommodate how we treat people. And then when it comes to the involvement of people, I think we also need to kind of step away from this idea that it always has to, I don't want to picture an image that citizen engagement is solely happening through participation panels or participatory design, but also exists through means perhaps like the publication of a DPIA or a database that enables the public contestability of these decisions, that at least there is opportunity within the public sphere to scrutinize the normative assumptions made by others and have people like civil society who represent a particular group of affected persons, and of course there's diversity within those affected persons as well, but that they can counter the narrative and participate through information and perhaps also pick up on certain stories that are inspirational and kind of get the ball rolling rather than everything having to come out of one singular meeting room that is periodically reorganized.
Good point.
Many thanks to all panelists, Laurens Nouts, Carolina Iwanska, I pronounced correctly, and Francine Deschesne, and the audience for attending. And now it's, I think, time for lunch, and all thanks for attending.